What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. Got my Week 12 wide receiver start and sit analysis here for you. As always, before we start pumping out all the information, got to talk about our accuracy. Last week, pop it up there on the screen. Over 70% last week. We're still missing a couple of guys as of right now, though. I'm recording this actually during Monday Night Football because we're trying to get the information out to you quicker this week with Thanksgiving being on Thursday. So the ones that we have included, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp were hits prior to recording this. And then also Mike Evans was a miss prior to recording this, along with the names that you see there on the screen. Antonio Brown, we still don't know about as I'm recording this as of right now. And again, Chris Godwin as well. Don't know about him yet either with this recording. So there's my analysis from last week. 71%, right where we want to be. Want to even push a little bit over that. So let's see if we can go back-to-back weeks of 70%. And one thing that I want to mention real quick before I move on. A couple of people last week made a comment on the video. I'm not responding to haters. I'm responding to actual questions here. So no one say, Kyle, don't respond to them. Okay, hold on. So a couple of comments last week about why I include so many players in my videos. And the person that was actually the person that made the comment brought up Van Jefferson and said, why would you include Van Jefferson when we know Van Jefferson doesn't ever do anything? Well, as you saw on Monday Night Football, Van Jefferson scored a touchdown. So the only players that I include in this analysis are guys that are getting a decent amount, not even like 2 or 3 or 4 snaps, a good amount of snaps and a good amount of targets, enough snaps and enough targets to actually make them fantasy viable. And don't forget, if I list them here as a miss and you think it's an easy miss and they end up hitting, I still have to take the L on that as well. But last year, there would be times where I would not include guys. They would hit, and then people would make the comment, oh, you didn't even know about this guy, or oh, you didn't even realize this guy was going to do anything. That looks bad on you. So this year, I just started including everyone that I felt could have a fantasy viable day based on the volume that they've been seeing so far. So wanted to clarify that with you because we got a couple of questions on that. But enough of that. Let's move on, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about Turkey Day. Thanksgiving, we got 3 games to go over. Up first, Houston and Detroit. The annual Detroit loses on Thanksgiving Day game. More than likely again this year as well, based on what I've seen from them so far. But with Houston and Detroit, talking about Houston first for the wide receivers, Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller are both going to be starts for me, just like they have been over the last few weeks. Also, keep in mind, Randall Cobb expected to miss a significant amount of time. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 weeks, it could be 4 weeks, but with that foot injury, he could end up being out for a while. So Kiki QT, I've got him listed now because more than likely he's going to be playing in the slot with no Randall Cobb, and that means some possible added volume to other people. We'll talk about one of those guys during the tight end start sit video, but it also could mean a little bit extra for Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller. Also, Jeff Okudah last week ended up exiting the game early for Detroit. So if that ends up being anything to monitor throughout the week, just keep an eye on that because injuries are starting to pile up for Detroit right now, including on the offensive side of the ball. There, I've got 2 guys listed as injured out doubtful this week. Kenny Golladay, Danny Amendola. Neither of them played last week. Trying to turn around on a short week again this week. And again, this is a team that's not really playing for anything right now either. So is there a reason to rush anybody back at this point? Now, some Detroit fans might say that they're trying to play for something. I am not buying it. But I don't know if it's going to be worth trying to rush those guys back on a short week. Kenny Golladay, for me, I said it last week, was more about 2 weeks away, which would put him coming back in week 13 next week. And I'm going to continue to ride that thought process there and see what happens. With Marvin Jones, kind of the lone start right now for the Detroit Lions. The D on the other side of the ball for Houston is bad enough that Jones is going to be a start for me, but the offense still worries me. I mean, this is an offense that is banged up right now. Matthew Stafford's hand is banged up. TJ Hawkinson's banged up. The offensive line has not been that good. Obviously, DeAndre Swift has the concussion. So it's just everything being an issue right now. It doesn't allow them to function at their full ability. And because of that, Marvin Jones, even though he's going to be a start for me, he's probably not a guy I'm going to have very high in my rankings. The afternoon game on Thanksgiving, Washington and Dallas. First off, Terry McLaurin, he's a must start. Okay, we are starting Terry McLaurin every single week. And that's why he is my Manscaped must start this week, okay? And I'm making him my Manscaped must start. And you could say, now with my must starts, I always try to go out on a limb a little bit and pick guys that, aren't necessarily locked in. But I need to reinforce the fact this week that Terry McLaurin, I don't want to see any more questions about whether or not you should be starting him. He is a locked in stone wide receiver 1, at least high end wide receiver 2 right now. He is top 10 in all major receiving categories, and he's 3rd in receiving yards now. And again, I see these questions a lot. Terry McLaurin or this guy, Terry McLaurin or that guy. 99.9% of the time, I am answering Terry McLaurin. And in a matchup against Dallas, it even reinforces that. So again, I'm making him my Manscaped must start this week because I want to reinforce to you, if you own him, he is in your lineup. And don't forget, if you head over to manscaped.com, you can use code word headliners, all capital letters. And not only are you going to get 20% off all of their great products, you're going to get free shipping as well. So manscaped.com, code word headliners, all capital letters, and get 20% off your purchase and free shipping. Now, with the other wide receivers in Washington, one of them could end up hitting at any point in time. All of them are getting little bits of volume here and there. It's being spread around a little bit. But like Isaiah Wright a couple of weeks ago, he was really close to being a star. I think he ended up having like 9.5 points. Steven Sims last week scored a touchdown. If he would have gotten like 2 or 3 more receptions, he would have ended up being a start. So these guys are really, really close. But the one thing is right now is Smith is just kind of spreading the ball around a little bit more after Terry McLaurin and then after J.D. McKissick, and you still got Logan Thomas there who's getting a decent amount of targets, just hasn't been able to turn them into volume or turn them into production consistently throughout the season. One of these guys against Dallas absolutely could end up hitting this week. I'm going to list them all as a sit for right now because personally on Thursday, there's just not enough upside for me to want to play any of them. For Dallas, Amari Cooper, he's still going to be a start for me. He hasn't been getting the touchdowns, okay? And that's the one thing that's kind of suppressed his fantasy value. But the volume remains there. Even this past week, you see that. Yes, CeeDee Lamb got that big touchdown, and that's how I continue to see kind of this wide receiver core playing out. Gallup is going to be a complementary role. He's more of a decoy at this point. Yeah, maybe he makes a big play here or there, but he's pulling defenses down the field. He's, keeping defenses honest with his speed. And then you've got Lamb and you've got Cooper that are really doing the damage underneath, intermediate, and then Lamb sometimes deep as well. So Amari Cooper, he's going to continue to be a start for me just because he's getting so much volume. And then CeeDee Lamb, such a big time playmaker, he's going to be a start for me as well. Good news is that Andy Dalton looked a lot more comfortable this past week. So hopefully moving forward, he continues to prop up their fantasy value. The nightcap on Thanksgiving, Baltimore and Pittsburgh. We're finishing up Turkey Day with a hard-fought matchup. One of what hopefully will be one of the better games that we see so far this season. Kicking it off with Baltimore. Right now, the wide receivers are a mess. I want no part of this wide receiver core. I mean, I think it says something about these wide receivers when Dez Bryant, who hadn't had a reception since 2017, steps in and leads the wide receivers last week. That tells you just how big of a mess these wide receivers are right now. We're not getting any consistency at all. Hollywood Brown continues to be an absolute bust this season. In the little bit we saw of him healthy last year, I thought maybe it would transition. So I don't know if I can blame it on Marquise Brown at this point because we've seen Lamar Jackson take such a big step backwards. But Duvernay, every once in a while, he has a decent game. Snead has had some really good games recently. But now you get this Pittsburgh defense that is just so good and in your face and in the backfield. It's really hard for me to trust anybody that is a wide receiver in Baltimore right now. For Pittsburgh, it's the same thing as last week. We're starting all 3 of these guys. No matter the matchup moving forward, all 3 of these guys are going to be in. And an interesting fact for you right now, Pittsburgh is the only team to have 4 players that have 4+ receiving touchdowns on the season. That's how much they're throwing the ball right now. You've got your 3 wide receivers, obviously with Juju, Deontay, and Chase, and then with your tight end, Eric Ebron at 4 touchdowns as well. So they're slinging it all over the place, and they are making more than enough fantasy viable production for you to put all 3 of them in your lineup on a weekly basis. This might be surprising, but for Miami and New York, we've actually got some guys to talk about this week. Devontae Parker, first up, he's got at least 7 targets over the last 3 games. Now, Tua is going to be the starting quarterback this week. They've already said it. So for any of you that are currently worried about it or hoping Fitzpatrick starts or whatever it may be, Tua is going to be the starter. They've already said that he will be the guy starting the game. Now, if he struggles again, there's no telling what could end up happening throughout the game. Maybe he does go back to the bench. But for right now, we're still going to list Devontae Parker as a start because he's been seeing the volume over the last couple of weeks. Now, for the New York Jets, Brashad Perryman, Jamison Crowder, they're going to be starts for me, while Denzel Mims is going to be a sit. All 3 of them are healthy and on the field together for the first time, which is good. This is what the Jets have been waiting for. Now, it's too bad Joe Flacco is their quarterback and not Sam Darnold. If Sam Darnold's their quarterback, then we can lock Jamison Crowder in on a weekly basis, but that just hasn't been the case lately. Still going to start him this week, though. Perryman right now, for me, he's the big play guy, and we've seen that over the last couple of weeks. He's had some really big plays that are really close to making him startable on a weekly basis. Him and Flacco have that connection. After that, in a matchup like Miami, it comes down to Crowder and Mims for me. Now, Mims is going to be a guy kind of like Gallup. Okay, when we talk about those wide receivers, when we talk about these wide receivers here, Mims to me is more like Gallup. He's going to be a guy that, every once in a while, maybe has a big play, maybe has a big game, but it's not going to be something that's consistent for me. Jamison Crowder is a guy that I think can be a little bit more consistent because when you have Perryman and Mims pulling defenders down the field, that's going to leave you a lot of intermediate space in the middle of the field to do some work, and that's where Jamison Crowder lives, and that's where he could end up making his fantasy, becoming a fantasy asset for you, hopefully, again, like he was to start the season. For Arizona and New England, I will admit I am concerned about Kyler Murray's shoulder. Watching that game last week, after he took that shot on the shoulder, you could see he was having some issues throwing the ball, working it out on the sidelines, trying to keep it warm, trying to keep it stretched out. And then there were some throws last week where you could see that he was like pushing the ball and not throwing it. And you could see that because the ball didn't have that zip on it. There was a couple of plays in particular. Larry Fitzgerald over the middle of the field and Andy Isabel, over in the right corner of the end zone. Both of those were passes that ended up being incomplete. But if Murray would have had a little bit more zip on it, he probably would have gotten it there before the defenders and actually may have scored a touchdown on either one of those throws. They really weren't that bad of throws, but he just couldn't get him there. Not only that, when you were watching him throw, he was pushing some balls down into the ground. When you're a quarterback and you're kind of shot putting that ball, it tends to dive when it gets closer to the wide receiver because it doesn't have a whole lot on it and you're kind of pushing it towards the ground. When you're throwing it like a regular football, when you're letting it rip, when your shoulder's healthy, it's going to have a little bit more of a straight trajectory on it. It's not going to go down towards the ground. And you could see that on some of those throws. And I'm going to tell you, that worries me about Kyler Murray. Now, with that being said, against New England, it's a tough matchup. I'm still going with Hopkins and Kirk. Hopkins is still going to be within my top 10 because the volume this year has absolutely called for it. I don't know if Kirk's going to be in my top 30, to be honest with you. This matchup for me is a little bit more difficult. I don't necessarily see Kirk having a big game, but again, for those 10 half PPR points, I could see him being right around there because he's still getting a decent amount of looks more towards the red zone. So we could still see a touchdown from him at some point in time. The one thing that is interesting from Arizona last week is Larry Fitzgerald. He had a team high 10 targets. Was that because they were just giving him the room? Or was that because of the shoulder issue and Fitzgerald was the guy that was just a little bit more closer, a little bit easier for Kyler Murray to hit? There could be some things that work there. Again, that's why I'm continuing to eye this throughout the week. For New England, I'm going back to Jakobi Meyers this week. Now, let me tell you, he was my must start last week and didn't end up hitting. But if there's any one of you out there that think that you saw that game coming from him, you let me know because I'd be more than willing to purchase your crystal ball from you. Because that is the only way you would have been able to tell that he was going to have a bad game last week. Jakobi Meyers for the last several weeks has been a top 10 wide receiver. For the last several weeks, nobody in the wide receiver core has been getting any type of volume outside of Jakobi Meyers. All of a sudden last week, N'Keal Harry, Damiere Byrd, And even James White got more targets than Jacoby Myers out of absolutely nowhere. I talked about N'Keal Harry last week. He played almost 65% of the snaps 2 weeks ago and didn't have one target. And all of a sudden last week, he out-targets Myers. Don't know where that came from. Don't know why it happened. Those are those situations where that's what makes fantasy football. And that's why I can only give you so much information, because then we get a stinker like that and you don't see it coming because there was absolutely nothing in the numbers to tell you that was going to happen. I am going to go back to Myers this week, though. The passing game with New England looked much better last week. They're going to be able to pass it against Arizona a little bit as well. And Myers, for me, has still been the most consistent player over the last few weeks. We'll see if Bird continues to be that guy, but coming off that big week, we'll see whether him or Harry or Myers end up getting Patrick Peterson. If I had to guess, Patrick Peterson will be on Harry, and then the other guys will be free to roam. And at that point, it's just going to whoever can get open the most. For Carolina and Minnesota, we have a lot of people to start here in this game. Another game where we can start 3 wide receivers all from the same team. DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel. DJ Moore, he was a big call last week. I got a lot of DJ Moore questions, and I told everybody that for me, DJ Moore is the guy that has the better big play potential, because that's what we've seen from him recently. And then also, if there was no Teddy Bridgewater, I feel like PJ Walker would be a lot more comfortable going to DJ Moore than he would be with Robbie Anderson. That's kind of what ended up happening. But where we need to go from here is looking at Curtis Samuel a little bit more on a weekly basis as well. When Christian McCaffrey went down, I did a video on why Curtis Samuel might be the guy to own and not Mike Davis. And for the first 3 weeks after that injury, yes, Mike Davis was clearly the guy. But all of a sudden, Curtis Samuel, he's coming out of nowhere, because since week 7, Curtis Samuel is the wide receiver 5. So that show that I did over on Patreon for our Patreon subscribers, that extra information I dove into on why Curtis Samuel could be a guy down the stretch with no Christian McCaffrey, holy moly, it ended up happening. Yeah, it took a few games, but we are here. 5 touchdowns over the last 6 games. So Moore and Samuel are kind of my starts right now, and Anderson, I'm still going to list him as a start, but he's going to be lower in the rankings for me moving forward. Samuel may be higher than Anderson in the rankings as well, but this matchup going up against Minnesota, giving up the 4th most touchdowns, I think you can start all 3 of these guys and be just fine with it. On the flip side with Minnesota, with Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, we're going to be starting both of those guys. They delivered last week as expected. We said that game was going to be a high-scoring game. It ended up being a high-scoring game. Right now, Thielen is leading the league in touchdowns, and it's because he's making his living in the red zone. Top 5 in red zone targets, receptions, and touchdowns. And of course, Justin Jefferson taking over for Stephon Diggs perfectly. Absolutely fits that role perfectly, and that's part of the reason why Adam Thielen has still been able to be so good this year, because he's got Justin Jefferson taking off some of that pressure. He doesn't have to be the wide receiver 1. Is he playing like the wide receiver 1? Yes, he is. Having Justin Jefferson helps, and Justin Jefferson having Adam Thielen also helps, and Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson having Dalvin Cook also helps. Now, if they could get a better quarterback, maybe they'd be more consistent. The Browns and the Jaguars, and it was a mess again in Cleveland this past week. Now they get to head to Jacksonville, and hopefully the weather's nice for them, because I'm tired of tuning into these Cleveland games and watching them play in like high winds and rain and just nasty weather. So hopefully Jacksonville is nice and sunny for them this weekend. The wide receivers don't have a whole lot of upside, but Jacksonville also doesn't have a great defense. I fully believe that one of these wide receivers are going to hit this week. So after looking over the last few weeks and after looking over some different information, I decided to go with Rashard Higgins as my start, because I believe that he has more big play potential right now than what Jarvis Landry does. And that's why I'm going with him. And even Hodge last week. Hodge had a pretty good game last week. I'm going with him over Hodge, and Landry is the guy to hit. Because again, I think him and Mayfield have a little bit better of a connection right now, and a little bit more big play potential from him than what we've seen from Jarvis Landry recently. So what about Jacksonville? Jacksonville, we are going back to DJ Chark as a start. I'm going to list the other three guys as sits here. I'm going to list two other guys as sits here, but I'm going to go with Keelan Cole is going to be a start for me. Somebody's going to end up having a big game here. Chark or Cole. It's going to be one of these two, and then any one of the other wide receivers could hit after that. My guess is that Cole and Chark have the best big play ability, so we're going to roll on that route. Now, what you've seen with Cleveland's defense recently, some of the numbers show that they've been a lot better against the pass. But keep in mind, like I just said a minute ago, they've been playing in really, really bad weather. And because of that, it's helped make it look a little bit better for that defense. I'm not taking anything away from them, but also keep in mind, no Myles Garrett this week either. So hopefully Jacksonville, with a much better weather than what Philadelphia had last week, and we saw it with Philadelphia, they made some big plays. Dallas Goedert got him a couple of times. We saw Jalen Reagor break up a couple of decent plays, had another one that he just missed. So because of that, I think we could definitely have two starts here for Jacksonville. For Tennessee and Indianapolis, I'm going to start Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. Is there going to be Adam Humphries? Is Jonnu Smith hurt? Davis, to me, if he's the set-in-stone solid number 2, like we saw at the beginning of the season, he can absolutely eat every single week. And that's part of the reason that he was a hit this past week. A hit in terms of being a start. I missed because I put him as a sit, but he ended up hitting this week because Adam Humphries ended up being out of this game. If there's no Adam Humphries, Corey Davis is a locked in stone start for me, and we don't know at this point if he's going to start. So I'm going to list Corey Davis as a start. For Michael Pittman in Indianapolis, we're going to go with him this week. I told you last week he was the only guy that I was considering for the Indianapolis Colts to start, but if Jair Alexander was healthy, I wasn't going to start with Michael Pittman. But I loved what they did with him last week. Over the last 3 weeks, Michael Pittman is our wide receiver 16 in half PPR formats. I love what they did with him because what they moved him towards was the open space, and they developed plays specifically for getting him into that open space and allowing him to run. If you notice, like his touchdown that he had, every wide receiver, every guy that was listed as a receiver there that was eligible, boom, down the field. Everyone took off. Pittman runs just a nice little slant over the middle of the field. Boom, toss it to him, off he goes. He did the same thing later in the game too. Didn't have many receptions. It was a tough defense to go against, but putting him in positions to win like that is excellent. That shows me the coaching staff knows how to utilize his abilities. And now he gets Tennessee, who he can put up some numbers against. We're going to list him as a start this week for Indy. Honestly, for the Giants and the Bengals, there might not be a whole lot for you to see here. I'm starting Slayton and I'm starting Shepard. I'm only expecting one of them to hit, though, but I'm listing them both as starts because they both have that upside. Now, Slayton continues to be that big play guy. He continues to be the guy to go down the field, and Shepard, since he's come back from that injury, has been more of that main target, seeing more of that volume. Now, 2 weeks ago, before the bye, Slayton did look like he was kind of getting back into it a little bit. We'll see if that happens again, and going up against Cincinnati, it absolutely could. For Cincinnati, we don't know what's going to happen at this point. Finley's going to be the starting quarterback with no Joe Burrow after the knee injury. And this just absolutely destroys the fantasy value for this team. I'm still going to list Tyler Boyd as a start, though. And I'm going to do that because I think he has the opportunity to be the most consistent. But we need to see what happens first. Because if Finley comes out and plays like absolute garbage, we may not be able to start any 3 of these guys the rest of the year. The Chargers and the Bills are on tap this week as well. And for the Chargers, they are so good with Justin Herbert. Man, did the Chargers strike gold with that kid. He is such a good player. Everyone that discounted that kid after that return to Oregon and just not seeing him take that next step, he apparently saved it all because he is taking actually that next step right now with the Chargers. Keenan Allen continues to be a start, and Mike Williams is going to be a start. Since week 8 in half PPR formats, Allen's the wide receiver 2 and Williams is the wide receiver 12. I mean, these guys are playing so good right now, and Herbert is consistently getting them the ball over and over and over, and that is what we want to see in that situation. for the Buffalo Bills. We're going to have Brown, Diggs, and Beasley all as starts. I think this game is going to be a big-time shootout. Two of the younger quarterbacks in the league, two of the higher-profile quarterbacks in the league now, two of like the next step in quarterbacks, right? Kind of the next era of quarterbacks to usher in and kind of become those top-tier guys. Face off in this game. And not only that, but the Bills and the Chargers are third and fourth in the league right now in passing yards. So there is 100% of an opportunity for both of these teams to light it up and have big time games. And that's why I've got 2 guys for the Chargers and 3 guys for the Buffalo Bills, because this game is about ready to be a shootout. The Raiders and the Falcons. And for the Raiders, Derek Carr is so good this season, and no one gives him credit for it. Remember when everyone was saying that he wasn't going to be the quarterback this year? He's putting a lot of people to... He's silencing a lot of people right now, which is good to see. Now, with that being said, he doesn't really have a steady wide receiver either. Nelson Agholor is the closest that he has to it. And really, with that being said, it's somebody that's kind of a boomer bust. Since week 2, he is the wide receiver 33. And because of that, he's more of a boomer bust wide receiver 3 option. And I apologize. It's actually since week 3, he's the wide receiver 33. So he is a boomer bust wide receiver 3 option for you. So here's a guy that, yeah, you can throw into your lineup. It's going to be a little bit more boomer bust, but who isn't these days? Who isn't at the wide receiver position right now outside of your top 24 guys that, you can consistently rely on? And even then, is it 24 deep? So a lot of guys are kind of are going to have that up and down roller coaster to them. It's Nelson Agholor though. So when he has a bad day, everyone's just like, the guy sucks. But when he has a good day, no one really talks about it. So for Vegas, he's going to be a start for me this week. And for the Atlanta Falcons, Julio Jones, I'm listing as injured out doubtful right now. It sounds like, based on reports, he's going to be a game time decision. That hamstring injury did not look good. I'd be surprised if he played this week. Keep an eye on the channel later in the week, though, for Dr. Ethan Turner in his video to see what he has to say about Julio Jones. For Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage, though, I'm going to start both of them. I mean, Russell Gage last week led the team in targets, and that was with Julio Jones going down a little bit later in the game. So Russell Gage still kind of found his way back into the mix last week, and Calvin Ridley, even with that foot injury, goes 9-5-90. So he still saw 9 targets, hauled in 5 of those. Maybe not, the type of day that we've been used to seeing from him so far, but if we go back to him being the wide receiver 1, we can start to see some of those huge games again, and that could start this week. For San Francisco and the LA Rams, this one's really difficult for me. I am going to list Brandon Ayuk as a start, but this is much better if we can get Deebo Samuel back out there this week. If he can play, then Brandon Ayuk will definitely end up being a start for me. He's been too good to put on the bench. However, if Deebo ends up sitting out, I don't know if I can play Brandon Ayuk. The problem is Ayuk just doesn't play in the slot that much, and that could be because Deebo Samuel has been out and they just haven't had a chance to really play together this year. But he hasn't played in the slot a whole lot this year. So who is Jalen Ramsey going to cover from the Rams? I mean, Jalen Ramsey is good enough to really work either Samuel or Ayuk. So hopefully Samuel gets back. Maybe keep Samuel out wide a little bit more often, or get Ramsey on Samuel so we can get Ayuk free and really utilize him. But if Ayuk has to see Ramsey on a consistent basis this week, no one's going to end up being a start here. For the Rams on the other side, is the O back on track? They looked a lot better against Tampa Bay on Monday Night Football. And again, I'm recording this video in the middle of Monday Night Football. I started at halftime, got to see the first half. Cooper Kupp absolutely lit it up in the first half. Bobby Trees found the end zone again. He had another big play. So this team, maybe they are back on track. And of course, my boy Van Jefferson, the guy that nobody wants me to list here because he's no good. He did have a touchdown last week. Now, we're not going to expect that on a consistent basis, but they really try to utilize everyone they can in this offense. Hopefully, the offense is back on track. If it is, going up against San Francisco in this interdivisional matchup here, definitely a good time for them to keep the ball rolling. Well, unfortunately for New Orleans, if your name isn't Michael Thomas, your fantasy value has absolutely tanked. We'll play Michael Thomas going forward, Alvin Kamara as well, but this isn't a running back video. But nobody else. I mean, because, with Taysom Hill at quarterback, we just don't know what's going to happen. The guy's not very efficient. Yeah, he's got a good arm. He can get the ball to Michael Thomas, but he's doing a lot of read options. He's keeping the ball himself. They ran the ball last week. 3 players, Murray, Kamara, Hill, all with double-digit carries. If that's going to be the formula moving forward, Thomas is going to be the only only guy that you can trust in this offense anymore. And then with the wide receivers for Denver, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, I'm going to keep starting these guys. They don't have very good ceilings at all. So don't get me wrong. We're not putting Jeudy or Patrick in to help us win weeks. We're putting Jeudy and Patrick in just to help us not lose a week. And that's because they're seeing a decent amount of volume. Tim Patrick, for number one, listed him on the waiver wire video. He's kind of the main target for me right now. But, you know, Jeudy is a guy that has that exceptional skill set. If he gets himself free, definitely has big play potential every single time that he's on the field. Drew Lock, you know, he looked good. He looked better last week than I think what I was anticipating. I thought the offense was going to be really bad last week, but he was able to get the ball to Patrick quite a bit. So Jeudy and Patrick for me in this matchup will be a start once again. Kansas City and Tampa Bay. And for Kansas City, Tyreek Hill obviously is a start, right? And every week I find myself kind of going back and forth. Who's going to be the wide receiver too? Well, at this point, honestly, I don't even care. I am not going to I'm not going to keep trying to guess every single week. If you find yourself in a format that you feel like you have to keep trying to run a wide receiver too for the Kansas City Chiefs out, I highly encourage you. To me, I would much rather run Jeudy and Patrick out that I just talked about than try to run Watkins, Hardman, or Robinson out. Because the way this offense works, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, they're the 1A, 1B on this offense for targets. And now you have Le'Veon Bell as well. So you're working on Le'Veon Bell and CEH as well on the ground and through the air, trying to get them passes. So after that, who's the ball going to? It's hit or miss every single week. And quite honestly, if someone doesn't have a big play or doesn't have a touchdown, they're not going to end up as a start anyway. Because not one individual guy, a wide receiver two, is getting enough volume to be a start every single week. And that's why for KC, I'm just going to move forward with these guys as sits. Now, if something happens and it warrants another person to be a start, we'll talk about it more then. But for right now, I'm off that bandwagon of trying to predict who's going to have a big week for Kansas City that's not named CEH, that's not named Bell, that's not named Tyreek Hill, not named Travis Kelce. For Tampa Bay Bucks, another team we're starting 3 wide receivers on, and I'm going back to Mike Evans as a start this week. The one thing that I saw going up against the Rams, and again, I've said it 3 times already, but I'm recording this in the middle of Monday Night Football. But in the first part of Monday Night Football, in the first half, from what I saw, the offensive game plan right now for Tampa Bay, we're going to throw the ball, and we're going to work each guy. So one drive, it might be Mike Evans. The next drive, it might be Chris Godwin. The next drive, it might be Antonio Brown. The next drive, okay, we're back to Mike Evans again. Because once you get one guy going and everyone starts to focus on him, you got to go back to another guy. And then we can move it again. And that's what this offense is going to be able to do. And that's why all 3 of these guys can end up being starts. Because, yeah, someone's going to score a touchdown. Someone's going to get a decent amount of volume. And then hopefully whoever the third one is gets a little bit of both to kind of squeak his way in there is a start. So all 3 of these guys will be a start. Because for me right now, it looks like this team is going to try and take a step back from the run game. And they're going to be passing it a lot more often. Sunday Night Football in the cold, in the night, up in Green Bay, it already spells disaster to me. For Chicago, I'm not starting any of these guys right now, including Allen Robinson, which might be a shock to you. The biggest factor is we don't know who in the world is going to play quarterback this week. Foles is injured, Trubisky is injured, and Matt Nagy, they both suck. And Matt Nagy has already said that it could end up being somebody else. So for right now, we just need to pump on the brakes. We've got to wait and see what happens with Chicago. I'll have more information on later on in the week when things clear up a little bit. But for right now, I can't trust any of these guys at night in the cold with possibly a third string quarterback when they're going to have to be going up guys like King and Alexander at cornerback. I'm just not trusting it this week. Too many issues that could end up popping up. For Green Bay, Davante Adams, 100% a start. Okay, we never sit Davante Adams. But Chicago, they're good against the pass. So Lazard, MVS, Darius Shepard, all these guys, none of them for me are going to be someone that I'm going to commit to as a wide receiver 2 right now, especially in this game going up against this defense. Now, later on in the season, when there's some better matchups, MVS, we may end up locking him in as the wide receiver 2. Lazard might be the guy after he gets back for a couple of weeks, but that is also a situation that we will have to monitor as well. Seattle and Philadelphia on Monday Night Football for week 12. And for Seattle, it's always DK Metcalf. And as much as he gives you heartburn and heart palpitations and makes you sweat and maybe you throw something every once in a while, It's Tyler Lockett again as well. And again, last week, a perfect example why. The dude will blow up out of nowhere. And going up against Philadelphia in a great matchup for this team, obviously it could happen again. For the Eagles, for the wide receivers, Jalen Reagor, Travis Fulgham are both going to be starts this week. If you watch Jalen Reagor on film, the dude is so good. And even though he didn't have a huge week last week in a sloppy game, you could still see some of those plays, some of that athleticism and some of those traits that led me to listing him as my wide receiver 2 in the draft this past year. The dude is uber talented, and I'm sticking with him as a start right now. And hopefully this is a game, again, that will be much better weather than what they saw last week. And then for Travis Fulgham, he got 7 targets last week. Kind of surprised me a little bit. They did, I think, try to force him the ball a little bit more than what they should have. But hopefully when they find a good balance with the offense here, instead of forcing him volume, instead of saying more is better, less is going to be better, because that efficiency is going to be better with him. So I'm going to list him as a start again this week, going up against Seattle, a team that allows a ton of fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. They both could absolutely hit. There you have it, Headliner Nation. My start and sit analysis at the wide receiver position for week 12. Do me a favor, down below, hit that like button. If you've got a question about one of the wide receivers, maybe I didn't talk about enough, or you want to know a little bit more about them, let me know in the comments. And as always, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button. Stick around, become a part of Headliner Nation today. Appreciate everybody for tuning in for this video. Everybody, stay safe and stay healthy over Thanksgiving. Hopefully you all have a great holiday, and I'm thankful for every single one of you that come and hang out with us on a weekly basis. And after this week is done, I want to make sure that we're all staying safe and healthy. So be careful out there this holiday weekend, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.